Hello noble ones and welcome to Metatron's Academy. I just found out about a very interesting video on a similar topic that I've recently covered, but from a person who is top-notch when it comes to the quality and the information presented on this topic, aka Dr. Jackson Crawford. And he recently posted a video, in fact 1 day ago, called Could a Viking Understand Modern Norwegian? Now, I was approaching this sort of topic as I was reacting to a channel called World Friends, where they had some guests, one from Sweden, one from Denmark, and one from Norway. And then they presented them with some recording in Old Norse and trying to see how much they could pick up. But that was very anecdotal, and also the quality of the recording wasn't great. And it is also possible, which is something that they do a lot on that channel, that they specifically selected the one sentence that they knew that they could understand because of similarities. But he is the one to ask when it comes to this, so let's check it out. As always, you'll find a link in the description and a pinned comment to check out original video. We won't be reacting to the whole thing.
Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. Could a Viking learn to understand or speak modern Norwegian? What would the challenges be? Well, we're going to have some starting point for a Viking, right? So what I'm going to use is not someone from just any place or time, but someone from the relatively late Viking age in Iceland or Western Norway. That's the language that we know the best from the early medieval period, because that's the language that's reflected in our Skaldic and Eddic poetry preserved in Iceland. Those are poems like those in the Poetic Edda that talk about the Norse
saga,
gods, or poems in the Skaldic tradition that praise Norwegian kings. And for Norwegian, I'm talking about that specifically because that's going to be closer than Swedish or Danish to that language. But we're going to find that the kind of Norwegian...
Let me read what he's saying here. Icelandic versus Old Norse is its own question, which I've gone over in some detail in this video. Ooh, Old Norse versus modern Icelandic, a demonstration. We're going to react to that one afterwards. Today we're looking at this one with Norwegian. But then I will be even more interested when it comes to the Icelandic, modern Icelandic versus Old Norse, how similar and how different they are.
That a Viking could understand best would probably be pretty old-fashioned landsmål, so the oldest kind of Norse, something that I've talked about a little bit on this video, Norse as opposed to Bokmål Norwegian. So let's get into some of these differences that the Viking would encounter pretty fast.
Cool. If you're into Old Norse, you should totally subscribe to him, a wealth of knowledge.
One of the most noticeable changes is the loss of the th sound, the sound that English spells as th. So this is spelled with a special letter thorn in Old Norse, and that letter in our classical form of Old Norse, the form that we teach in textbooks, is only used at the beginning of words.
Okay.
He would have to learn that that becomes t just about everywhere. So for example, thola, to endure, becomes tula, to endure. Again, I'm going to use kind of an older fashioned Norse as my basis for Norwegian here. It's not going to be very much like an Oslo speaker, which is what most people think of when they think of Norwegian. Or for the number 3, where an Old Norse speaker says thrir.
Thrir.
The closest thing he's going to get is an old-fashioned landsmål tri. Actually, most modern Norwegians say tre with a lowered vowel. That vowel lowering is something else you'd have to get used to. It's a little bit sporadic in Norwegian.
Feels a little bit like the vowel lowering that happens between Italian and Sicilian, for instance. That would be interesting. Because in Sicilian we say tri, ce n'è tri, instead of tre, modern Italian.
Much more common elsewhere in Swedish and Danish.
Yeah.
That th would become a d, however, not a t, in a lot of low-stress common words. So, for example, you, talking to one person, is no longer thu, right? Fairly clearly related to English thou, but do. And we also see that old oo has moved forward in the mouth. You'd have to get used to that pronunciation, which it's hard to say if a Norse speaker would have consider that either.
I love that with him, of course it is, but with him it's like from the perspective of an Old Norse, like what we would imagine a Viking to be. How much would he understand of modern Norwegian? I love that he looks at it the other way around. Of course he does. Love it.
A U or a Y, it's kind of between the two. There's also eth, which is the other th sound from an English perspective. So
the vocalized one in father.
Thorn is the one written with the letter that looks like a P with a branch above it, is the TH in thin. Eth, which looks like a medieval D with a slash through it. Some people it looks like an O with an X above it, is the TH sound, and then. The
Yeah.
difference is then your vocal cords aren't vibrating, then your vocal cords are. Well, that eth has actually gone silent in Norwegian. It is sometimes still spelled, but it is no longer pronounced. So, for example, in a word like time, Old Norse teeth, that's modern Norwegian tea. Now, because
this is fascinating from an Old Norse perspective. I'm going to keep saying Viking for ease of use. Of course, imagine that as meaning an Old Norse, the language, but I'm talking about like a Norse person. Even though I say Viking, I'm going to use it interchangeably. So for them, it would feel like modern Norwegian is missing something. And I think classical Latin is similar, or Latin in general, when compared to Italian, for instance. Probably for them, our language today is missing a lot of pieces, right? Museum, or all the words that have at the end, like imperium, romanum. For us, impero, romano, it probably sounds like we are cutting a lot of stuff out.
Because some spellings in modern Norwegian and the other continental Scandinavian languages today are historically informed, some of those old eths are still spelled as t's, because what happened is that between Old Norse and modern Norwegian, a t went to eth, went to silent, but they were close enough to a time when they still wrote these as t's that the spelling with t has been brought back. A good example of this is the word the when used with neuter nouns. So for example, the ship, Old Norse skipet, modern Norwegian skipe. Now, several things have happened there, but let's talk about the t first. That t at the end first actually went to eth. So first you'd have something like skipið, which is modern Icelandic. It's how they still say it there, the kind of middle stage. Then the eth would go silent.
So Icelandic is more conservative. Makes sense, of course, because a lot of island languages tend to be more conservative. Of course, this depends on various historical events, but in Italy is similar. Sardinian and Sicilian, Sardinian being the most conservative when it comes to any connection to Latin, but then Sicilian is also quite conservative, and definitely more conservative than Italian, in my opinion, at least, when it comes to word order. And the Sicilian has a lot of admixtures from other languages as well, so there is that we need to consider. But islands make sense.
And then it's rewritten with a T from the earlier time, even though the T has become silent.
Right.
Other things that have happened in that very word, we have palatalization.
Yep.
That means ska has become sha.
This happens as well. I mean, this is fascinating. This happens exactly the same way. Classical Latin, the SC was a sk, like in Scipio Africanus, but then that becomes Scipio, not only in Italy, in Italian, but also in the Italianate pronunciation of Latin, aka ecclesiastical Latin, probably something that happened, was already a thing in the Middle Ages, probably was already a thing, started to become a thing in the late antiquity. That's discussable, debatable, I imagine, but yeah, we can pinpoint it.
We have some related changes too, like ga becoming ya and ka becoming hya. These palatalizations happen before front vowels, that is e, I, well, in a pronunciation sense, e, a, e, u, and also the consonant j. So
for those who didn't notice, he actually now pronounced two different qualities of e sound. One was closed, e, and one was open, e versus e.
A Viking would have to get used to saying that gester, but jest, not skip, but sheep. And then we also have the quantity reformation. So in Old Norse, we have various vowels that are written with an acute accent above them in our classical standard or in modern Icelandic, and then some that aren't. The ones that have that acute accent above them are held longer.
Yeah.
So for example, driva, to drive, has a longer E sound than drivin, driven.
Interesting. Another point of connection with Latin. In Italian, we do have a little bit, although then again, we don't look at it as vowel length, but we mostly look at it as accented syllables, and then naturally accented syllables tend to be pronounced longer. If you look at the word to love, amare, it's clearly that the first a is shorter than the second. So there is a quantity variance there, or variable rather than a quality. Amare, amare. Now I don't have to extend it to infinity. I don't have to say amare, that's a bit too much, but amare already gives the second a length differentiation. But we usually don't think of it that way. Instead, in classical Latin and similarly in ecclesiastical Latin, there is phonemic vowel length. So not only there is a difference in the way vowels were supposed to be pronounced, long or short, and this happens to every vowel in the register. So basically you realistically have now 10 vowels. You have a versus a versus e. Whether it's closed or open probably depends, and there is regional variation. I would say go for a true mid and you'll be okay. Then you have E versus E. I do not believe that it's versus E, by the way, but that's an item of debate that we can discuss with a dedicated video. I do think it's E versus E rather than versus E, because is a Germanic sound, and I do not believe it was present in classical Latin. There is O versus O, once again, true mid, and U versus U. Another point of discussion that I have sometimes with Anglophones who try to do versus U, I think it's U versus U, and it's not a quality difference, it's only a quantity difference. Regardless, it's phonemic, because in Latin, if you pronounce the same word with a long or a short vowel, you will have a difference in the meaning. So it's semantic, very complex.
In modern Icelandic, these have just different quantitative sounds.
Yep.
Driva to drive, driven, like the short I in English, driven.
Yeah, I was going to say.
In modern Norwegian, something kind of similar has happened, but instead of being based on whether it was long or short in Old Norse and getting a different vowel quality based on that, we have a different vowel quality often, but also still a length difference. But the length difference is no longer conditioned by whether it was long or short in Old Norse. It's conditioned by whether it's followed by two consonants in modern Norwegian or not. So for example, ship, having a short I in Old Norse, that doesn't matter. What matters is that it's followed by only one consonant in modern Norwegian, so the vowel is long.
I see.
Whereas in a verb like kjenna, to know, the vowel is short. It was short in Old Norse too, but what conditions it to be short in modern Norwegian is how many consonants follow it, two in this case instead of one or none. A Viking would probably struggle with this. I know that as someone who learned Old Norse before I learned any modern Scandinavian languages, that this quantity-quality reorganization of the vowels is one of the hardest things to learn. It's very, very different from anything that you do in Old Norse.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So he basically went the path of the Viking. So he's actually the perfect person to discuss this, not only because he's got the academic knowledge to back up everything, give us all the discussion in a very in-depth way, but also because he actually learned it that way. First he learned Old Norse, and then he picked up modern, either Scandinavian or maybe Nordic, since, I mean, Icelandic technically is not a Scandinavian language. It has Scandinavian roots, but it's a Nordic language, the way I understand it. If I'm wrong, professor, if you see this, do correct me, but the way I understand it is that all Scandinavians are Nordic, but not all Nordics are Scandinavians, in the sense that usually Finnish and Icelandic are not considered Scandinavian. Only Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian are Scandinavian, but they are all Nordic. Am I wrong? Do let me know in the comments if any of you know, or if the professor sees this. It would be great, because I don't want to misinform people.
Or in a language like Finnish, which is not related to Old Norse, but is a similar system to the Old Norse system for long and short, and what that means. It can be pretty arbitrary, right? And it's marked in Finnish by writing a consonant or a vowel twice to make it long. Anyway, that's some pronunciation things, by no means all of them, but so that this video isn't overly long, let me give you a quick word about my friends and partners in Grimfrost, a quick word about an offer that I have on Patreon, and then come back to talk about some grammar.
I didn't know he had a Patreon. Let's check this out. So, Jackson Crawford, Ko-Fi page. I don't know where his Patreon is. It's not linked here. Let's see if he shows
Grammar
it.
differences. First of all, Grimfrost, my good friends there in Sweden, in Karlstad.
Patreon.
You get a monthly live meeting with me where I'm going over the most recent part.
Patreon.com/Norse by SW. Of course, he's got his own website. Oh, here it is. I apologize. It was right there staring me in the face. Okay, yeah, he has 2,331 members. That's wonderful. And here we are. Okay, so if you want to learn more and support, his work, you should absolutely do that. And I think I'll join it myself, because, I mean, Jackson Crawford, as I say, a treasure of knowledge when it comes to anything Old Norse related. But with that being said, as always, I do not react to the entire video, because I like to, give people a reason to go and watch the original, and therefore click the link in the description on the pinned comment. But up to this point, this was absolutely fascinating. A little bit of a brief window. It's a short video for sure, but I also want to gauge your interest. So if you like this sort of videos, I'll make an in-depth one, and we can use this as a basis and then make an actual comparison with Latin and modern Italian and make it into a much deeper video, which would require a little bit of research and preparation on my end, of course. So maybe something a bit more complex than what we just did today. But as I say, it's a bit of a shorter one. So it does seem to present a lot more information. So do click the original video and give him the like. Thank you very much for watching, noble ones, and for joining Metatron's Academy. Goodbye.